Hi, everybody. I was ready. Hi, everybody. Hi, Dr. Nagel. Just sort of happened by default. So you guys are here for the far future of gaming, right? All right, everyone's here for that? So I don't want to keep huge introductions. We'll keep this brief. We'll all introduce ourselves, and then we'll just dig right into this because I think it's a really interesting topic. So let's just go to the line.
Sure. I'm just chewing a mint right now. I'm Chris Hazard. I run Hazard Software. We do mostly strategy-level serious games. Although we made the 2011 RTS, the time travel RTS Acron, we've got another game that we made into the external gameplay workshop that will be announced at GDC in a couple of weeks called Plosh Time Bomb. I have a PhD in AI. I do a lot with privacy, trust, reputation, game theory, decision science, all that kind of stuff.
I'm Grim DeCoster. I've been doing a podcast on games for about 10 years, and I lecture pretty widely at conventions like this on game design, game theory, also finance and Wall Street and all that sort of nonsense. And I'm the executive producer at a small game studio making visual novels and story games. You might have seen We Know the Devil. That's the studio that was associated with that.
My name is James Portnow. I'm a game designer by trade. I worked on games ranging from the Call of Duty series to Farmville, and stuff for Riot to stuff for Square Enix. But most people know me as a bean person on the internet because I write extra credits.
Hi, my name is Chanel Summers, and I am a sound designer for Merchant Technology. I've been in the video games industry for about 20 years, was on the original Xbox team, and actually work a lot in commercial virtual reality, augmented reality, mixed reality. Just did the continuation of a project with Intel Labs that was at Sundance New Frontiers called the Leviathan Project.
My name is Joey Gariziak, and I'm the outlier here because I don't do anything with game design. I'm a professor of sport management, and I do a lot of work at looking at the future and the viability of sport and business models. And so that's kind of what I'm here talking about, is what the future of video games looks like as far as the business of it goes.
So to give a little bit of context here, and in terms of in 2004, so give roughly a decade ago, that's the sort of hardware we had going. Games like Half-Life 2, Counter-Strike Source came out. We were pushing, PCI Express just exists. AGP was still in use in 2004. And yet if we go back about 30 years, we're talking megahertz are a big deal. So there's definitely been an acceleration of technology and acceleration of trends. I mean, we went from that to that. But I picked these 2 year points in particular because I work on Wall Street as well, and a 10-year projection is the far limit of what we can project in terms of technology we'll need, sizing for projects. That is beyond the horizon of what we actually plan for, and 30 years is insane. 30 years is not talked about. 30 years is never discussed in professional circles when money's involved, at least in that industry in the context of what I do. So in terms of gaming, can we talk about games 30 years from now? Is this acceleration from from this? I mean, more changed in the last 30 years than changed in the last 80 years before that, I'd argue, in gaming. So will more change in the next 10 years than in the last 40 years?
Well, I'm going to actually jump in and just say that I don't think we can, because I remember going to GDC 8 years ago and nobody was talking about tablets, right? Facebook didn't even exist, and that was for a while a huge revolution in games, and everyone thought it was going to be the next big thing. And so we are incapable of predicting out 3 to 4 years, much less 10. Much less the far future, which we're about to do.
Yep.
And I'm going to argue in between you two and say that there's some things that we can predict. There's certain psychological mechanisms. There are, addictive personalities. There are deficit of, what is that thing called? I've just been talking about it all the time. Decision fatigue. When you make so many decisions and your brain glucose is been pulled out and you've got nothing left. And those sort of things are fundamental. And even if we look at how much games has changed, they have not changed that much in the sense that they just optimize towards certain goals.
I also think that through, academics and research, we can make some predictions. I mean, there's things that we're doing at, I also work at USC, and there's things we're doing with telepresence and holograms, robotics and kinetics that where we're looking actually from 10, 20, 30 years out that we can roll some of those things into gaming.
Yeah, we can talk about these things all day long, but at the end of the day, we're going to be wrong. No matter what we say and what we do. It's impossible to actually predict what's going to happen. And Chris, I think you made a good point that concepts are very similar from one decade to the next. It's this advanced technology and how we present these concepts the things that are going to change, and it's virtually impossible to talk about what they're going to be because we really have no idea what's going to happen.
So, to skip back all the context, get right into it. Virtual reality is what everyone asks about whenever there's a panel like this. This is what everyone in the audience wants to talk about. It's going to change everything forever. Video games are completely different. We'll never have a screen again. We're going to be in full immersive, like, haptic suits. Like, is that really what's going to happen? Like, virtual reality, is this going to be the 90s all over again? Or
Yes.
are we on an accelerating trend?
So, I mean, I've very vocally voiced my skepticism about the current virtual reality push. I mean, I've seen virtual reality come and go so many times in my career, much like 3D for film, right? And right now, I worry that there are very cool things about virtual reality, and I think that eventually there's a lot of potential in it, but I worry that we've hyped it up so much right now that the current state of virtual reality is not going to meet consumer expectations at a very high consumer price. Your companies that are building major games right now are sort of in a wait-and-see holding pattern to see if consumers actually adopt this. And if any of you guys have played any of the virtual reality demos, games made specifically for a virtual reality environment, designed for a virtual reality environment, feel so much better than just slapping Call of Duty in your virtual reality headset. Without those custom-made experiences on the huge budgets that we talk about with modern games, I don't think you're going to see the consumer adoption. I think it's going to be sort of that death cycle.
Ken? Oh, sorry.
I was just going to say, yeah, I absolutely agree with you. I think it's a wait and see kind of thing about consumer and VR. Again, I work in the VR space, but I work in a commercial VR space. So it's very much present in location-based entertainment. It's very much present in corporate simulations. I think there it has success, but it is a wait and see game in the consumer space.
Yeah, I mean, I actually think the adoption may come outside of games, even though we've really hyped it up as games being the thing that's going to push it.
And as an executive who actually is doing this and managing these sort of things, I'm totally in agreement. We're hedging our bets. We're not focusing on VR, but we're building out stuff in case it does take off, that we're poised and ready to go that direction.
So let's assume 30 years go by and like the consumer technology is there, the pipelines to build games are there. Kind of like how when 3D games became a thing, like, the Unity engine didn't exist. You had to make your own engine if you wanted to make a 3D game, and now Unity exists. So once Unity and all the equivalent things for virtual reality, like all those pipelines exist, 30, 40, whatever years from now, what will that be fundamentally different gaming? Like, what will be different if virtual reality worked the way we want it to?
Well, we all want the holodeck. Like, and that's the expectation for virtual reality. And no matter how much I try and throw my brain there, I can't see us getting there in 30 years.
How about 100 years? Will we ever have the holodeck? Like, will that exist ever in games for humans? So I already qualified a little bit.
So it's this whole issue of, I mean, at that point you get into, are you going to just plug it straight into my brain? And if so, do we ever leave a virtual environment, or do we just end up uploading the species and call it a day, right?
So in terms of, how about put it this way? So what kinds of games would you design? Like, forget the full holodeck, but is there a consumer level of virtual reality beyond what we're at now, but at a level that would meet enough of the average person's expectations, assuming that there's a little bit of education? So like 40, 50 years go by, the average person understands virtual reality the way they understand cell phones now. They have more reasonable expectations of it. Not 100% reasonable, but more reasonable.
Do you have a slide on augmented reality or not? Or can I
I
get rid of that?
do.
There is,
Okay.
yes.
Because that's
So I was going to blur these two lines together right now. This is like maybe a good segue, maybe not. But so with VR, one of the issues is you're in the VR device, you're in your environment, and that's problematic, as you just saw as I was moving around here. It sounds awesome, seems great for all of these reasons, but I'm not going to use it as much as I would if it was augmented reality. But suppose we have an augmented reality that is so good that it can block out and we can turn it basically into VR. Well, if we can use that piecewise, what does that do for us as a society? If there's something, if you have PTSD, you have a trigger, you don't want to see it. If you have Google Translate, which is Word Lens they just bought out a year or two ago, you hold it over and it real time translates the language and the text that you see into whatever language you want.
And it works. I've used it on menus. It's amazing.
Yeah, and so if you have this sort of dynamically altering environment and you have all these pressures commercially to gamify things, well, now you start talking about things like censorship in gaming, like what is real and what isn't, because if you're wearing these things all the time, you're talking socially, or communicating, I should say, not even talking, just communicating somehow with people, playing with people, very nebulous terms, but you don't really know what's real and what's not, and then you take off those goggles like, I don't like this very much, and depending on when those experiences hit, if you have companies that are controlling your attention, they're controlling your glucose in your brain about when you're decision fatigue, when you do these sorts of things, all that's very engineerable. So there's a lot of possible for manipulation, but also some really exciting things.
So I feel like I've been talking way too much, but I think that our augmented reality future is the most interesting and realistic. I think it requires that we get more wearable technology to really allow us for the type of overlay, but we can all imagine a non-games application to an overlay to reality that we want, right? A map that will direct me where I'm supposed to go. That will remind me that I've got a talk at 2:30 that I've got to be at, right? That just pops up on my glasses. There's all sorts of things, whether or not, or things like being red-green colorblind and adjusting for that. And then the games technology making our world more magical is functionally limitless once you have that. I also think that you're right that once we combine it with things like, I do believe that medical technology, we're heading to a lot more personal medical monitoring, where we will eventually all have devices that will monitor your heart rate, all that sort of thing, just sort of implanted because it actually makes medical technology, medical costs much cheaper to have that sort of preventative care. Once you have that data, once you have the data on what the game is doing to me physiologically, plus the ability to expose me to it at all times, that creates a wild possibility for the world to me.
So there's already an undercurrent that the technology sufficient to make the kinds of games you guys all want to make with like virtual reality, augmented reality, is the technology that might destabilize or destroy humanity. That seems to be...
Or save humanity.
Right. Or just transform humanity.
Right.
It could, but then how much do we rely on this stuff if something goes wrong or something goes down? How much do we rely on all these augmented realities, virtual realities, versus what we do in our everyday lives with personal, face-to-face communications? What is this going to do as a society, and how is this going to change us when people are already critical about how technology has changed us right now?
Well, I read a study years ago, and there's been a bunch of follow-up studies. So, there's a way the human body reacts if you lose a sense. Like if you use a limb, lose eyesight, lose hearing, there's a depression cycle. There's things that happen to you because you sort of expect this input. Recent studies have shown that if you have a smartphone and use it like a modern person, and you lose it, you lose access to that smartphone for more than a few hours or a few days, your body treats it like you lost sight, like you lost sound. We've already integrated these things into our brains. Like I think that sci-fi future, we've already gone far past. It would be very hard to pull that back.
Yeah.
I've already ceded most of my external memory to the device that's in my pocket.
Well, actually, the question goes back pretty much as far as we can recall, right? I think it's in the Phaedrus that Plato says, these kids with their newfangled books and writing, they can't remember a whole epic any longer, right?
Yeah.
And so I think as a species, we've always dealt with this question of changing who we are by our technology, but I think you raise a really good point that it's time we start thinking about it before we create the technology instead of afterwards, as we've always done.
And anyone who's seen my talks on creativity and game mechanics and psychology behind that, there's really four things that enable creativity. One is relaxation and boredom. You need downtime. You need domain expertise in the areas that you're going to be creative in. You need divergent thinking that's kind of hardwired in. And you also need to be intelligent to some degree. It's correlated with IQ up to about an IQ about 120. But if you've got games and companies pushing and prodding you every moment, I got to check my Clash of Clans or Facebook or whatever, all these moments, you don't have the relaxation and boredom. If you outsource all of your memory to your devices, you're not going to be creative in those domains. So we need to engineer games such that that's not lost, or if those things are lost, if we're outsourcing it, that we have a creativity replacement somehow with our communications, so that we become the nodes and we become creative together rather than just by ourselves.
So could augmented reality or virtual reality to simulate spaces replace conventions for people who are here because they like to play role-playing games or tabletop games in person, like with their friends? Like, will we hit a point where it could replace that experience, where people would treat it equivalently, short of the full holodeck?
I don't think so. Tony Shalevsky from Intel Labs, when we were creating the Leviathan project, and if you're interested in seeing this, I'm actually going to be presenting it at my talk tomorrow at 4 o'clock, which was actually a conjoined AR and VR experience. She says that we never replace the way that we tell stories. There's always still going to be books. There's always going to be traditional and conventional ways we tell stories. There will always still be film, and I feel the same has to do with gaming as well.
And I think that a huge part of the problem is haptics in space. one of the things that we lack with VR right now, and I think the biggest problem with VR is solving what do I do with my feet, right? It's the same problem that was with motion controls. If I'm looking around the room using my head, but have to use a mouse or use my fingers or my thumbsticks to move my feet, all of a sudden there's this disjunct in my body, and it no longer feels as present. And if we can't virtual reality teleconference and I can't go like that to you, then it is not the experience that we're getting here, right?
To put it to a sports reference, Roger Goodell, the commissioner of the NFL, has said he is fighting HD TVs because it's too easy to stay at home and watch sports and not worry about actually going somewhere. It's cheaper, it's easier to be on your couch and watch whatever's going on. But there's a reason that every NFL game, or virtually every NFL game, sells out still. It's the experience of the face-to-face, of the actual personal interaction. It's more than just the game that's going on. It's the whole encompassing environment that you're within, and it's being able to relate to one another more so than just through a screen somehow or through a speaker or microphone.
Although there is work in this area of like bringing in sort of like with advanced uses of telepresence, of bringing in a person sort of hologram and being able to like have them be in the room with you and also kind of like feel them too. So there is actually some very interesting work being done in this area in research labs across the country.
Though I wonder, there's always a speed of light too. If you're sending light across a fiber optic channel, it's about 1 millisecond per 100 miles. And at some point, granted, 1 millisecond, nobody can really notice that. But as you get up and further apart, those little nuances, those little feedbacks you get in people will start getting delayed because you already have little delays in VR. They're doing some awesome things to counter that, but there will always be more and more the further apart you are.
In fact, that could get creepy because say to get around that, you do predictive motion. Like some far future where like we're teleconferencing together, but I'm in Australia at a conference and you're here, and we're interacting and it's sort of predicting my nuanced movements because it has to deal with the latency of you responding to them, but at the same time, it might deviate a little bit from me and has to snap back. And that seems like a really tiny thing, but so unrelatedly, right now, chatbots are getting very good. And there are chatbots that can give you suggested responses. If like mom messages you and you don't really want to deal with it, it'll just respond. And it's mostly indistinguishable from you. You're basically creating this avatar of you that's interacting with other people, and it's possible to lose control of that eventually.
Let me actually add to that. We are actually starting a project right now, I can't say it was for one of our clients, looking at building an AI to mimic domain experts in certain players. We're just starting on that in a couple months. It's R&D, very early, but that's already coming.
So the ghost in Mario Kart, you're raising
Yes.
this. Imagine the ghost where it's fatality, perfectly captured from the days in Quake, and he's sitting next to you in a virtual environment playing Quake.
So the funny thing is we still make the ghosts in Mario Kart. They're actually not doing anything once they're off the screen, once you can't see them, just to save cycles. And so I always wonder how much cheating we're going to have to do, especially for some of the telepresence stuff, because with the telepresence things, one of the points that you raised was really interesting, as was this idea of this hologram, because I'm always thinking about the consumer, because my job is very consumer focused, and I always wonder, most of these things require sort of a room in the house that you have space for this. I know in my apartment, right, I'm living in the middle of a ever-growing city that's getting more and more advanced with more and more expensive real estate. I don't have extra space to have a room to, whether it be project holograms or have a...
Put an 8-way treadmill to stand on.
Right, exactly. The hamster ball.
And think of China and India and all the people around the world. They
Right.
don't have space. This is a heck of a lot of resources needed to do these things.
Right. And so I was wondering if anybody had any thoughts about how we solve that, because I think you're absolutely right, that technologically we have the capacity to do a lot of this, but then every time I try and put it in a real consumer setting, I can't make it work. And so I was wondering if anybody had any thoughts about things like that.
Oculus made one very specific. So I got the demo at the last PAX Prime of their newest haptic controller. Like a simple thing, it's like a hand thing.
Yeah.
But iconography might be a way to get around this in the sense that you use iconic haptic interfaces and iconic motions to sort of abstract everything. Because as humans, we're really good at reading into those sort of abstract information. We'll take a symbol and we'll assign a lot of meaning to it. And the way this controller worked is it was sort of shaped like your hand, like this around it. So it had a pointing finger and the rest of your hand. And as you moved it, it just kept track of the telemetry of its movement and recreated an icon of a finger like that moving with you. And there was a person in the same room as me, but they were doing the AR. They were like manipulating objects in front of me. And it was scarily realistic. My brain, when I took the thing off, I actually gasped because I couldn't believe how small a room I was in. And despite being a skeptic, it was like the technology not really being here yet, that experience was surprising to have had now, as opposed to 10 years from now. And they did it by really simplifying and letting our brains fill in all those further minor details.
And iconography can change drastically within one generation. The kids who don't grow up, like, they're not writing cursive now, many of them are not. And if they grow up with this iconography, I'm wondering if English will get closer to Japanese in another decade or two with emoji, where they're just using in place of the words instead of kanji. And will we have similar things like you mentioned for haptics, for sound, for even interacting with a person? I don't need to really see the virtual person, I just need to see their avatar. Well, we're kind of getting there in certain minor environments, but maybe even I just need an icon, the chat icon, the picture of them. Maybe the next generation, that's enough.
It's funny you mentioned avatars. One of the teams I work with, for one of their clients, they've only dealt with their avatars. That's how they've always met and done all their business meetings. And so they just recently had an in-person meeting, and they were pretty nervous about that. And they're like, "Oh, I think that's them. They kind of look like those avatars." So it's really peculiar.
I had a colleague once who was surprised that I was a white dude. Both of them. He assumed that I was another nationality, a specific one, oddly. Like, he had a very specific expectation of what I was, and he assumed that I was a woman, just from our online interactions for years. And then we met to go over a project, and he was like, "Oh, okay."
James, I like what you said about keeping the consumer in mind, though. Coming back to the idea about how much space it's going to take up, how we're going to build these situations in people's homes, or that it's accessible to the consumer, because we're in a consumer-based society where businesses have to operate with the consumer in mind about how we're going to give this to people that they can get access to it. How are you going to make it cheap enough? Where's the space going to come from? How are you going to, it requires a level of intelligence as well. They have to have some kind of idea about how to manipulate this stuff in order to be able to use it, and the masses are not the most intelligent people. You got to dumb it down to the lowest common denominator. And so I don't know where we're going to be with this idea about VR, AR, because I don't know if the masses can handle this stuff. And I just don't know what it's going to take for them to get there, because it's going to be expensive, take up space, it's going to be complicated to use, and I don't know how we're going to make that, and I don't know the answer to your question about what do we do about this. If anybody does, you could probably make a lot of money, because that's the answer, that's the golden answer.
There's a reality now of that this is the playground of the relatively wealthy and well-off in the industrialized world, and even in America, like, just talk about here in Oculus. To have a computer and a video card and Oculus and everything is a pretty big chunk of change, so it's only going to be a self-selected sample of hobbyists who are willing to overlook a lot of those limitations now. So it's not going to be mass market, but it's the most mass market it's ever had.
And because the advances are happening so fast, the impact that they have on each generation is hard to measure. For example, TV was around for quite a while, and they measured a lot of things like you shouldn't show 2-year-olds TV. Anything under 2-year-olds should have 0 screen time in front of a TV. 4-year-olds is still very damaging. But now screens, okay, they've got an iPad or they've got some sort of a tablet. It's interactive. Is that better because the children are still building all their neural pathways? They're still trying to learn how to pick up a pen. And if they're just watching a screen, they're not learning those sort of things. And we don't even have a full real generation of that before we move on to the next technology in VR. So we really don't know. We're kind of exceeding our headlights. And it's very hard to get a controlled study to know what sort of effects these will have on the.
Well, especially if those people are all the self-selected. It's all us people who are really excited about this.
Yeah.
I mean, if say it caused eye pain, I'd probably just ignore it and suck it up because I'm very interested in VR. And maybe it's causing eye pain in everyone, and we haven't really thought about this. It's the jerk all over again.
Motion sickness, or the inability to refocus, because VR does not have, that's still far off, at least from my understanding, of getting the focus right, because you're used to looking at something close, looking at something far away, and VR is just kind of everything is at the same level of focus. And yeah, there's some techniques around that, but there's still, the aperture of the eye is still missing, and I don't know how to solve that.
So to push it on a little bit, because we're talking about haptics, that's not really consumer tech yet. Like, no one can get the vests that make you feel someone's hand on your shoulder and it feels right yet. They're always really creepy feeling at best, and they're really expensive.
Did you see the FPS vest where you feel getting shot?
Oh,
Brilliant.
Is it wrong that part of me would be kind of interested in that? Like, this goes way out. But,
Yeah, it is
the
a little
holodeck,
wrong.
if I'm not going to die, I would be interested in playing Counter-Strike where it's real. Yeah. But at the same time, am I the self-selected person that's going to mess me up in a way that I can't foresee?
Don't worry, you already are.
You're on the panel.
So how far off is some of that stuff at all? Like, if any of you used any of the more modern, recent attempts at haptic interfaces, like the gloves that have little bladders that sort of fill a little bit when you touch something, Has anyone like interacted with that, or is that even beyond the domain of our hobby level?
I've seen it. I've not interacted with it.
So I think
Yeah.
it's beyond us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So sports go
Yes,
away.
this is the question I really was hoping you would get asked.
Yeah. I was waiting. I knew the slide was coming. I was waiting for it.
Because, for example, football with the concussions, like as the science is showing, this is a dangerous game. Football can't continue to exist as it does. It's going to change. But yet we have sports like baseball that have existed beyond living memory, mostly static. Is there going to be a large shakeup in sports and games in the next 10 years or 50 years based on technology and modern science?
Yes. Short answer, yes. Long answer, yes, with some explanation. And I hypothesized about 5 years ago that football was going to go away within the next 50 years. And, football's never been stronger than it is right now. But back at the turn of the 20th century, the top 3 sports in the world, well, not the world, soccer is number 1 in the world. Top three sports in America were baseball, horse racing, and boxing. And boxing is pretty much non-existent unless you're Mayweather or Pacquiao. And horse racing, nobody even cares about that anymore unless you're at a horse track or a gambling casino or something. And baseball, yes, is still around. It's been around for about 150 years now. And with football, yes, it's going to go away. And actually, the sport with the most concussions is soccer. Soccer has more concussions than any other sport in the world. The thing about football is that it's not just concussions. It's more than that. It's all these violent hits, and you've got more and more players that are retiring before age 30 now than ever before. And that's because they're paid so much at such a young age that they can retire. It makes it so easy to retire because they're getting paid $10 to $15 to $20 million a year. And so they get to 27 years old, all right, I'm done. I don't want to get any more concussions. I don't want to develop CTE, which has been shown in a lot of studies that this causes a lot of really bad problems really young in life. So it's all about the quality of life. So yes, football is going to go away as we know it eventually. I don't know when. I don't know if it's 10 years from now, 20 years from now, 30 years from now, because kids aren't playing it anymore. And kids are the key to what's going to happen in the future. If kids aren't playing football, football will not exist in the future. If kids are playing video games will exist in the future. It's all about what kids are doing these days and the way that we're teaching them. That's what's going to happen in the future, and that's what marketers and business owners know, is that they're looking for kids and seeing what they're doing. You got to tap into that resource, and football is losing kids. They're hemorrhaging kids. Sports like lacrosse, picking up a lot of kids. Baseball, soccer is actually picking up a lot of kids, getting more popular. So I think lacrosse, with that element of violence, that Americans love violence, is going to gain in a lot of popularity because there is some violence, but you're not seeing these huge hits like this one right here. Football's already dumbed down the rules, and people think it's a different game now than it was 10 years ago. 10 years from now, it's going to be even more watered down or dumbed down. It's going to look like the Pro Bowl, and the Pro Bowl is horrific to watch if you ever try to watch the Pro Bowl. It is not a football. It's not an NFL football game by any means. And so this is going to go away, and sports will certainly change, and it's going to be, I think, for the better safety, but worse for the average consumer because they're not going to like it and enjoy it like they used to.
The consumer side is very interesting because like you said, football is still extremely popular
Very popular.
among people who just watch it.
Yeah.
So at the same time, you keyed up on kids, but the esports scene is kids. Like kids now, like that is their sport. That is what they're playing. So is that really going to be the wave? Is the next generation esports, or is there going to be a replacement to some of the existing damaging physical sports?
Well, I hope it's esports, and I talked about this yesterday a little bit. I think esports is going to continue to grow and is getting more viability. There are some issues with esports. There's always some issues. It's still a startup sport, and it's not following the model that other traditional sports that have been successful are doing yet. It's going to get there, I think, and I hope. But there's a new sport out there called drone racing. It's the Drone Racing League. And what we're seeing now is not just esports, but we're seeing sports and things pop up also kind of like battle bots from about 5 or 10 years ago where you're controlling something else that's involved in the action. And so you're working in kind of this simulation sports because it's so much safer for the actual person, the human, because you're not putting yourself in direct danger. If you ever try to watch the Drone Racing League, it's like watching the Blair Witch Project, but 10 times worse. It makes you want to throw up. It's really hard to watch. So as far as a spectator sport, I don't know if that will succeed. They've got to change some things. But it's a really cool idea that it's a human controlling something else performing the action. I think that's kind of the wave of the future, is this idea of simulation sports. You still get the excitement, you still get the competition, but you're not putting anybody in direct danger. It's more simulated.
So here's a question for you. Do you think that, because right now we have these kids that play a lot of games that are participating, and traditionally spectation is where it is.
Right.
So do you think that it's going to stay that way, where spectation is where it is, or will that change in the next coming generations to be participatory?
I think spectation is always paramount to anything else, even talking about commercialized sports or anything. If you don't have spectators, you're not going to succeed as a commercial venture because that's the consumer. That's who you're selling your product to. It's like watching any sports competition. I was just watching the Dota 2 tournament for a little while, and I didn't know what was going on most of the time. I've never played Dota 2, and I'm putting myself in the average consumer's shoes that if I don't know what's happening and I'm listening to it, I get lost very easily, but I know something exciting is happening because the shoutcasters are fantastic. But so the consumer and the spectator is always going to be paramount to participants. Participants, yes, are necessary. Obviously, you got to have people that are playing it in order for the sport to go on. But in order to succeed commercially, you've got to have spectators.
Well, and I think you hit on the key part to whether or not esports really break out, right? Is this question of, can an average person who has never played the game actually enjoy watching the sport, right?
Yeah.
And I think we actually learn a lot from poker, televised
Yeah.
poker. If you look at it, the World Championship of Poker has been going on for about 70 years now, but about 15 years ago, they radically changed how they televised it. So you would see the hands, you could experience the drama of the players. They would tell you the exact percentages. Between every commercial break, they would tell you what all the hands do. And so you could feel the human drama even if you didn't really play the game. And I think that's where we need to get esports for it to really become a spectator sport.
Right. We're definitely, like I said, we're lacking a lot of things with esports, and it's just, and esports is different. You know, there is no one central governing body, and there is no time for commercial break like you would have in something like poker. It's not as slow as poker. It's quick most of the time, and we're still working on it. It's still so young and it's in its infancy. I think it's only going to get better. I think people just need to give it time, and I think that's going to happen. It will be successful.
So how about the physicality aspect of physical games versus the sort of execution aspect? Like we're talking about esports, I mean, they're physical, but not in the same way as like doing the 100-meter dash. When I say technology, I mean, we're talking about everything. Will humans be bred to the point that we're reaching a sort of physical perfection to where the full physical component of like baseball, swinging or running or jumping, it's random who wins because only the perfectly groomed people through their lives with the perfect genetics have the chance to even compete because they're in that upper echelon? Or does the sort of performance of physical exemplary skill disappear in favor of these execution skills of more modern video games?
Well, I think that we have a little data point here in terms of the devices that have come out in the last 15, 20 years. Before the iPad, before the iPhone, computers, everything was hotkeys, and I still use it to this day. I avoid my mouse as much as possible because it's so much faster. But that was because much of the software was used by experts who were working in their one field. They wanted to be proficient, and that's what the software was designed for, proficiency. But then when the market started to expand out to many more people, they needed to be very accessible. So proficiency doesn't matter as much, but what matters is that somebody can sit down and learn it very quickly. But then that makes people it makes proficiency that much harder, and it's not the emphasis. So I think that we've got that data point. Will that continue, or will, as you have as it becomes more ubiquitous, all these technologies, the next generation is all using it, will that ratchet up the levels of proficiency?
It's like if every kid I keep Little League of Legends, if every kid is playing LOL, then there's societal knowledge of it. Like kind of like how there's societal knowledge of baseball. So even if, baseball is kind of not rigged, but like it's got a lot of problems as a sport in terms of determining who is the best at baseball. But at the same time, the cultural cachet sort of keeps people enjoying the spectacle of it more so than the competition of it.
Yeah, and you make a good point. I think it is a cultural shift, and it takes time, and these paradigm shifts always take time for us to change as a society. And as people are growing up playing these video games, the average age of a gamer is 35 to 37 years old now. So that age keeps going up. So people are passing this down more and more and more. And I think physical games, these hardcore physical games, are eventually going to go away. Roman gladiators, that doesn't exist anymore, number one, because we don't like seeing people kill each other, literally. But also because we've kind of graduated from that as a society and as kind of a world. And I think this idea, and people love seeing guys smash into each other as hard as they can to get a ball 10 extra yards further than somebody else. Ooh, that's really exciting. It's great. But I think as a society, we're going to be like, why were we doing that in the past? That was stupid. We can play these games that are so much more exciting, and anybody can do them, so much more accessible than having huge men run into each other as hard as they can. It seems so trivial when you look at it from that outside perspective. And I think as a society, we are going to get away from that romanticized idea about what sport is, and it's going to change eventually.
And I think you raised another good point too about where are things moving. You said gladiators aren't done anymore. It's getting easier and easier and easier. And as AI and different technologies, automation start taking over more and more jobs, start automating doctors and lawyers, what do we do as a society? This could be a very big problem. A lot of people are talking about it. Are games sort of the thing to placate people, to give them something to do? And again, more on higher automation, more accessibility, removing that physicality. So maybe 200 years out, it's all virtual. There's no physicality anymore.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of think about the sports you watch that you know a lot about. You might know what calls to make or even what to do in a sport, but I didn't play hockey for 30 years. I'm not good. I'm not physically strong enough to play hockey with people who know what, or who have trained, even if I had other abilities.
I just don't think that humanity as a species for some time is going to lose the desire to see what our own physical limits are, right? Like we look at the Olympics, we're still doing the Olympics, even though some of those games are not watchable as far as like standard consumer sport. So I think that you're right in terms of us shifting away from them as mass media, mass consumer sports. I think we will always, though, retain, or at least for a long time, retain this desire to see how far, maybe between physicality and technology, we can push our current selves, right?
But that could bifurcate society too. If we get the designer babies and genetic modification in countries that are more lax with that, they start producing these super beings, and then you have two sets of society: the people who are the performers who do those sort of things, and everyone else who's the spectators and who does the virtual things.
And that happened during the end of the Cold War. I mean, a lot of research came out that the Soviet Union was doing horrible things to people to make athletes perform better, with drastic consequences to their lives.
Yeah, and I think, we like pushing ourselves to the extreme, like seeing what can we actually do and what can we do to get us even better. Let's push the limit, go past the limit, go over the wall, past the wall, through the wall, whatever you want to call it. We're going to do whatever it takes to the extreme. That's why steroids were such an issue in sports for a long time, and that's why they were outlawed. We want this level playing field. But athletes wanted to be the best, the absolute best they could be, no matter what it took. Extra working out, extra time in the weight room, extra practicing, even taking some kind of medicine that was not exactly legal. So they're always trying to test themselves, and I think you're right, that's kind of human nature. We want to see what we can do, we want to be the best at what we're doing, and then be better than our best. And it's always going to be there, and I just don't know to what extent we're going to want to do that physically at the detriment of our health. I think people are more health conscious now than we ever have been.
But are you also saying that, but some of it is also enjoyable too, like going out, just for consumer people, playing, like flag football, going out and playing tennis, playing golf, and, playing basketball, participating in sports. It's fun, that's also good for our health. It's exercise.
Right. I don't think recreational sports will ever go away because it is good for our health. It is fun to do, and I would never be a proponent of that going away. But as far as like things like football, this hit right here is perfect. That picture is perfect because that is what needs to go away, because that is the new kind of gladiator we have these days. And I still see people running and playing. I think this will turn into more of a flag football league. That's what the NFL will eventually become, is very close to the flag football. There's a reason the XFL, the Extreme Football League, did not work out. It was too violent, and it just didn't work for people. And so we like violence, but we like controlling our violence to an extent.
So maybe your bifurcation, maybe the bifurcation might come down more along the lines of sports that are driven based on genetic ability and physical training become more leisure activities for an idle society, and meanwhile the commercialized, exemplary, because spectators watch the sports, are the more execution-driven, crazy ones, and we sort of push. That might be the split if we're optimistic.
Or what about we just create robots that play these sports? And we watch that, and then they can get as physical.
The movie Real Steel, it was perfect.
Yeah.
You're controlling a boxing robot.
Yeah.
So I think that's perfect.
But do the robots feel pain?
Oh boy.
I felt emotional pain.
That's a whole other.
Let's go right into that, actually, because we've developed programs that are 100% simulations of the neural systems of very small animals, certain kinds of flatworms, some ants. Is it anti-ethical to torture an instance of the class that fully expresses the neural network of a small animal like a tapeworm? If you make a boxing robot that has AI to fight, and you're sort of betting on that AI, at what point does that become a problem for us?
If you make a simulation game and it has these sort of life forms in it, is it ethical, and are you allowed to turn it off? Or is that a white elephant that you have to keep on paying money to keep it running?
So when is this going to be something that people other than people on this stage talk about? Like this level of, because this is going to happen. We're going to develop an AI that's as smart as a 2-year-old child. And then what do we do?
I am actually skeptical still about our ability to develop an AI that, because we haven't ever actually made that leap, right? We keep talking about it, and people keep saying it's coming. And granted, we haven't had much time, but over the last 20 years, I've heard that a lot too. And I think that we're going to get more and more complex logical devices. I don't know how much through logical gating we can actually emulate our emotional side, because I don't think we even understand enough ourselves as a species in human beings yet, right? And so I will first start by saying I'm not sure I believe the premise to be completely valid, but if it is, even so, to me, the biggest question is a much more present one about what are we doing to human beings right now by using all of the psychology that we currently have available to us to take you away from other things that you may benefit from more in order to retain you in our games for as much time as possible for commercial means.
So I was talking to some people who basically they do that analysis for casinos. And the terminology they use is very callous, and it talks about like what is the take rate you can have from a human who's playing your game, taking money from them, below which a significant detrimental life event will occur that prevents them from returning to the casino. Because you want to pull enough as much as you can, but if you pull too much, they'll never come back. So you can't just take all their money because then they're in jail or something. But if you take most of their money,
Just keep them interested. Yeah, keep them come back for a little bit more.
So you're right. We already have very real ethical problems to worry about.
Well, all those same Skinner boxes that casinos use to build the reward systems for their slot machines, we use on a lot of games. I mean, especially I've talked to people who have spent a lot of time, and I mean, I have struggled myself, like being in MMOs and realizing consciously that you would be happier if you did other things with your life, right? And then not doing them because we've developed such strong psychological traps. To me, that is the first ethical dilemma that we have to overcome, because I don't want us to get even better at it without having solved that one.
Yeah.
Is it different if we hired psychologists, like say I'm an evil game company, I hired psychologists to make the addictive game and I'm doing this, versus I'm trying to make a game that I would like and I addict myself and all the designers, we design it not for any ulterior motive, but it has the same negative consequences because designing a game that I want to play forever happens to make a game that everyone wants to play forever.
So, I mean, I hate to, because we all know that everybody in this room is probably fairly pro-game, I think it's important that amongst ourselves at least we wrestle with these issues. So I'm going to use the analogy that is probably the harshest, but right, use the same statement but for drug manufacturers, right?
So will there be in the next 20, 30, 40, 50 years regulation of game mechanics, regulation of games industries on that level? Because it happened in Japan.
Well, let me give the anecdote I think I gave earlier today about decision fatigue that I had this year. So I was playing my company had a game that we had to make for a marketing game where they really asked for a lot of things like casual games. I tend to play random things, like just I'll try a new experience. So this year I was mainly playing top 10 casual games. Just what is this experience like? 'Cause it's not something I'd normally play. And so at the time I was playing Clash of Clans. And I played a little bit in the morning, and then had all these decisions to make in the day. You know, it's normal for my job, but we were in a bit of a crunch. And at the end of the day, I was unable to make any decisions. I was like, I don't care, like just whatever. And I was making poor decisions, and I recognized that in myself. And I was like, holy hell, this is decision fatigue. And I kind of realized that at least part of it was caused by me playing that game that I normally wouldn't play in the morning. Now, decision fatigue, it happens because when you make a decision, only a small set of neurons are firing, and then the rest of your brain justifies. It all lights up and resets the mouse traps to make your decisions. And that's a lot of work. That depletes the glucose in your brain. You can only restore that by eating, resting, sleeping, that kind of stuff, regular healthy things. But once you're depleted, you make horrible decisions. And this works great for car salesmen. This works. It may be an explanation for executives who have bad personal lives, who they make all these executive decisions throughout the day, and they're incapable of making good decisions anymore. So now that we're playing games, if we've got these games that have push notifications and they start intruding in our lives in different ways, the games can engineer when we make good and bad decisions. And you can use that for good or for bad.
I was playing this game called Subterfuge recently. If any of you,
yeah.
It's an online real-time game that takes place over a few weeks. And slow real, like I attack you, and the subs are on their way, and you see them one by one as they're coming, 48 hours in advance. And I happened to go to Disney World while this game was about halfway through, and I was like, I didn't think it was taking. Like I kept pulling my phone out like every 10 minutes, just like checking on it and doing stuff. And yeah, when I think about it, like I was weirdly zombified and drained by the end of every day, and I just assumed I was tired at Disney World.
And with these games, many of these decisions, like Clash of Clans, my example, those decisions really don't matter much at all. But they take so much of your brain power to make them because there's so many options.
And even, I mean, the raw time, like Clash of Clans, any of these games that want you to come back regularly, we all know there's that common adage that you basically lose 5 minutes on the side of anything that you're doing. And so every time that push notification comes up and you have to spend 2 minutes in the game to do this, you're breaking whatever else you're doing, and yet you feel in some ways compelled to answer that push notification. And so it's also very disruptive to work patterns and to just train of thought. And so there are a lot of questions around these.
I like that this slide is up here, this idea of ethics, because in the business world, yes, you keep ethics in mind, but they're selling that product to you. You're playing their game. They're winning. All right, these people that are producing these games, they're like, all right, they're selling this game, they're playing my game. We got them hooked. We got them. This is right where we want them. And hopefully they're using that for the good, ethically. But at the end of the day, they've got to make money in order to be successful. And that's a harsh reality a lot of times, and something a lot of people don't want to hear. But in the business world, if you're not making money, you're not going to be in the business. So they want to make that money, and hopefully they're pushing a good agenda. But at the end of the day, it's that bottom line. Is that figure positive or negative? Are they making a profit on this game?
I would sell ads that are actionable that you only see toward the end of long cycles of play of games
Right.
like Clash of Clans. So yes, hey, $5, all right, sure. That's a really good idea for a company.
The nice thing the one positive point I've seen is that for the most part, while in the short term things like Clash of Clans are doing remarkably well, I think we even have the recent example of Zynga, who built entirely Skinnerbox games, who last quarter lost $250 million, and this quarter lost $150 million, where we've actually seen a lot of these companies that try to do truly unethical manipulation of humanity through games fail. And I think part of it is the same way that we've seen us become inured to advertisement and propaganda in every new medium, right? How you go down the road, you don't even look at the billboards anymore, right? We all switch channels when there's an radio ad or a TV ad, when there's pop-ups or banners on the internet. You don't look at them or click on them anymore. Occasionally you do by accident, right? Because you're literally not noticing them that much. And as we as human beings become psychologically immune to all these new methods, so I'm hoping that generationally that sort of manipulation will fail and fail in a business case versus what I would call quality game design, because of our sort of psychic resilience.
Let me add a very fascinating connection I just made for this. Last year I saw a talk by the former director of NASA, who was director for a long time, and one of the main messages of his talk was how much resources different systems spend on defense. I'm not saying just it's militaries, yes, country militaries, but city defense. Your nervous system for suppressing over exaggeration, so you don't vibrate too much. How much we spend in computing, and he gave ants, like how many resources they dedicate to just preserving themselves. Your immune system, all across the board, except for computing, for computer security, was about 20 to 25% of your resources are spent toward defense. So if you think about it in computing for security, we're only spending about 3 to 8% of our effort on that. And with ads, with ad block and things like that, what percentage of our resources, our cognitive resources, are we spending defending ourselves against the onslaught of people pushing information into us? It's actually creeping up, and I wonder if, I don't know if it's very hard to quantify. If somebody could quantify that and say that's around, if we're getting close to that 20%, but I would imagine for it to retain resiliency, that any prediction we make of the future, I think that will hold, that it will probably be around that ballpark.
Well, and it's a really good question. I'd love to see a study to see if we get better at events, just like in a modern military sense, we have come up with new tools and new abilities to be more destructive on the same cost output for society. Our 20% has become more effective. I wonder if humanity, as we've been exposed to more and more media, we become more effective, we become trained, so the 20% actually has a higher barrier than, say, someone from the 18th or 19th century.
Yeah, I completely agree.
Well, there's probably been, because ad blocks in the regular news recently, like only in the last few years has like grandma realized she can block ads. But yet all of us were like, I've been using host files since the first day I was on the internet to block ads. Like,
There are ads on the internet?
my parents would block ads because they were very like with it. Someone's family duty who had manual ad blocker would sit and record The Simpsons and pause it so it wouldn't record the ads, and then the rest of the family would watch the episode without ads. And it was a rotating chore of who had to record The Simpsons. But that was a very small percentage of the population. Only recently, as ad block started getting mainstream, is just like how Zynga and everything has collapsed. Is there possibly an awakening or more awareness of these things? Like there's a pushback, like it pushes too far, and then normal people even realize this game is messing with me, and they push back. So maybe there is that equilibrium between the two, which is a very optimistic thing, actually, about humans, I think, if that is true. Or do we not, or is this going to, is it going to go the other way? Because now we're signaling by blocking ads that we are very valuable people to advertise to. We're willing to pay to block ads. We're willing to spend a lot of our resources to prevent these things from intruding. Doesn't that make us a more desirable target?
So I would argue the HBO case, right? That actually and even Hulu now, right? Where many companies have realized, actually, rather than advertising to you, advertising is such a tax on you that we will let you pay us to not advertise to you and save our advertising dollars, right? And we somehow as a society have come to accept this, right? But it's great. That's actually the world I would rather live in than the world bombarded by ads.
Well, it gets into, because a lot of games are funded where you're, like us, the players, we're not actually the customer. The customer is the advertiser. We're the commodity, and the game company is selling us to them. And that's how a lot of media is. Like, that's everything. Maybe that's going to shift heavily and suddenly in the next 20 years.
And James, to your point about how that 20% is spent and what are these types of attacks, well, nuclear weapons changed militaries across the board. That threw everything up in the air because you can't defend against them easily. It's very costly to do so. Is there a nuclear equivalent of game mechanics that really get people hooked? Like that funniest joke from Monty Python, the funniest joke in the world which killed people. And now we're getting closer to that. I've heard some games described as, denial of service attacks in the human mind or various types of exploits. But does that exist, and are we getting closer to there, or will that not exist?
Well,
Well, I was just going to say, that's an interesting thing, like if we actually really exploit the power of sound. What we can just do with it with frequencies. Sound is super powerful. It can do things that are wonderful, and it can be very destructive as well. Again, if you look at frequency properties of sounds, you can use sound for therapy, or it can cause things like emotional distress. It can cause great health issues. There was a number of factories where workers were getting super ill. And they went and researched this, and they're like, wow, there's no asbestos, it's completely clean, what's going on? And what they realized is that fluorescent lights that were kind of on their last legs were generating these specific sound frequencies that were actually affecting the physiology of people, so making them super ill. So we can, so frequency of sound, you can kind of, use that for good or use that for evil. So that is a very powerful mechanic that can be used in games that really hasn't been.
so what if I use it to make a really clever, like Five Nights at Freddy's, like a horror game, but use infrasound, like those low frequencies that cause, really low frequencies that sort of resonate in your gut, like literally in your bowels.
Absolutely.
They cause this deep sense of existential dread, which is a
Yep.
weird thing, but that's what happens.
Absolutely.
And what if you make a horror game that just does that with subwoofer? I don't know if the subwoofers today could really do that, but what if you made a game that used that to cause someone to feel real fear? That's pushing ethical lines, I think.
Yeah.
Yep.
Is
in
that
and of
ethical?
itself.
No.
Yep, absolutely. I
But-
mean, I'm like with biosensing too. I mean, if you look at, gosh, I can't remember, it's the Erin Reynolds game, where she kind of did some early examples of this, of biosensing and feedback loops, of like, the game would detect how you're feeling, and then it would change and then feed back to you and make you feel a different way, and then that would feed back into the game, and then the game would change again, and so forth. And I know there's more and more people looking at biosensing and feedback loops and how like one affects the other, so.
Let me toss another question to you too about haptics and sound. Now, a couple of years ago, maybe a decade ago, there was a guy who came up with a way of having 2 ultraviolet sonic speakers, and he could get an interference pattern such that the sound would only really audibly appear in a very specific location. Like in this little bubble, you stick your ear and you hear it. You stick it anywhere around that you don't.
Yep.
If we keep on moving that direction, like I saw something recently about pinhole cameras, lensless cameras, a flat little thing you can wrap around a bottle, and now it can take amazing pictures, possibly in the future. Could that exist for sound, such that we could have a haptic device that uses sound to give us those types of feelings?
Well, I know the University of Bristol, they're doing stuff with ultrasound where essentially you can kind of feel objects through sound. So there's already that kind of work
Cool.
being done, yeah.
So we've got about 5 minutes left, so I want to get into the last 2 questions of, like, for all of you. And I asked this at the last MAGFest we were at, and I'm sort of compiling all the answers to this over the years, and already my answers a couple of years ago were pretty dumb. So, but seriously, like, well, I guess let's go down the line this way. What do you think is the biggest thing that'll change? Like, some big prediction you have for 2025. So not that far in the future, 10-ish years.
What is that, 9 years, 10 years?
Yeah, 9 or like a decade. Let's say a decade.
In the next decade.
Yeah, like, is something big going to change that relates to games?
Relates to games. Well, for me, I think esports will be much, much more popular than we see it today. I think there's going to be a unified league, and I think players are going to get paid millions of dollars per year. And I think there's going to be much more competition, and game designers are going to capitalize on that. So I think esports will certainly grow in the next decade. I think that's one big thing. That's my biggest thing. I'm sticking with just one.
I'm going the hologram route. I mean, particularly even on a lower scale, if you look at like the Star Wars chess pieces, that kind of zoom up and act out and have their own little AI and move around. That's my prediction.
Then I will go with, we'll get the first wearable, primitive augmented reality device that's actually adopted by consumers to enough of a degree to be sustainable.
So I think that the traditional games like Go and chess and checker, like basically every kind of like 2-player symmetric mind game, I think humans will have nothing left to add to the games. Because there was, like a few weeks ago, Go is not solved. Go is by no means solved. But there is an AI that appears to be able to beat any human at Go.
Well, so the only problem with Go is then you expand the board by 1 line
Yup.
and the humans crush the AI.
But this was 19 by 19.
Right.
That was an order of magnitude beyond what was previously achievable.
Absolutely. But what's really interesting is that so many of the intuitive human skills
Yup.
translate to 2020, whereas so many of the computer skills do not.
Yup.
And so I'm curious to see if we have to radically change our games or keep expanding our games in order to make them.
Yep.
Yeah.
But because I mean, chess, the humans have not had input in chess for more than a decade. Like
Right.
no human is pushing the game of chess. Checkers is mathematically solved. So I think all those games, there will be a meta within the next 10 years, and I made this prediction based on what happened a few weeks ago, that will not involve humans. The human meta will be an entirely separate meta of all those sort of symmetric 2-player games.
I think game design is going to become a hard science that is widely applicable. Maybe not exactly by 2025, but close to then. I liken it to what's happened in finance back in the 1950s. You had people who were, this is, you trade from the gut, like, smoking your cigars and things like that. And now they're terraforming lines between New York and Chicago to lay fiber optics so that the math can work faster. And I think that, between, psychology, economics, operations research, decision science, game theory, all these sorts of things are culminating together. And game design is pretty pervasive. Gamification is kind of making some inroads. And this will be basically everywhere. I mean, maybe it's not called game design, maybe it's called behavior engineering. But if you're working in game design right now, you better start learning your math and psychology really hard, because that's where I think it's all going to be. The rest of like, oh, let me make a little game here. I think, and also with AI, there's a lot of AI for game design and mechanics, studying them, active physics, looking at the physics of social systems. There's making a heck of a lot of progress in the last couple of years in that, predictively, really hard math. And I think that like casual game design that doesn't, maybe like a little indie game, that will still be there, but all of the rest of it will be a hard science.
So last question to end the panel. How about way out there, 2065, give or take 50 years?
Jeez. Can we say hoverboards and flying cars? Can we go back to that, or is
Like-
that already passed now?
I guess the real question there is, like, assuming that we are able to overcome all the reasonably foreseeable technological
Yeah.
hurdles. Like, I'm not talking we have faster than light travel, but like, we could make projectors that project directly into your eye and they're perfect. Like, we can solve all the physical limitations.
Jeez.
What's gonna happen? What would happen in games?
I mean, I think it's all going to be, I think virtual reality is going to be commonplace at that point. I think holograms will also be commonplace in every household. There's not going to be any more TVs on the wall. Your TV will be kind of a table where everything is happening three-dimensionally, and you can sit around it and see what's going on. You can play this game that's three-dimensional with holograms instead of playing it on something that's on a wall. That will be commonplace, is playing it in front of you. I think virtual reality and holograms will be commonplace to the average consumer. Will be able to afford them, and can have them in their house, and everybody will have it by that time.
I think cyborg technology, where it's just completely built into our system.
Like Ghost in the Shell, like cyberization straight up?
Yep.
Like,
Yeah.
my mind is in a mind state?
Yep.
I think we have enough things to solve this century that I'm not sure. I would love to see us that far. I'd love to see as much resources dedicated to games. I'd love to see humanity be able to do that. I might take a more conservative prediction and say, and yet a more wild one in some ways, and say that the tools will be there to the point where creating a game is as simple as painting a picture. There are very vastly different levels of skills, but anyone, including someone 4 or 5 years old, can create a basic game.
I want to say, I had something else, but I actually didn't. I think that the virtual reality, not holodeck level, but I think this is basically the end of my lifetime if I'm lucky. I think we'll see the ability to sort of study someone's brain and or their behavior and generate, not like a clone of them. I'm not going to make like a clone of my mind state to go forward into the future. I think I'm a couple generations too young for that. But I think a gamer clone of me could exist that can be able to play games that I never played, and it'll play them the way I would play them, but wouldn't otherwise be interactive. I think those primitive mind states will come out of games first.
I'll make a societal prediction and say that, if we look at agrarian to industrial to service economy, I think we'll make another shift there where it will move towards more like a post, I don't know what to call it, but like a post-service economy. Where now we have 1 or 2% of people in the U.S. are manufacturing food, and another small percentage doing manufacturing, everyone else is services. I think that the services will become increasingly more automated and will shrink down to some smaller percentage, maybe still double digit, not sure, but that much of it will occur like we have gold farming in games. Okay, that's kind of a little tiny piece. I think they'll become richer and become a vast part of the economy.
And on that note, I hope this was enjoyable. We've gotten the time signal, so we'll be around the rest of the convention doing more and more of these panels in all these same rooms.
Yeah.